In 1969, at a workshop in Brighton, Michigan, a transporter would arrive from Ford's Dearborn assembly plant carrying brand-new Mustangs. Finished cars, painted, trimmed, with engines already bolted in, and the first thing the men in that building did to each one was pull the engine straight back out and set it on the floor. Then they cut the car apart. They went into the front structure of a brand-new unibody Mustang with tools, removed the shock towers, which are not trim, they are load-bearing parts of the car's skeleton, relocated and reinforced them, lowered the front suspension arms by an inch, revised the geometry, moved the battery to the boot, and only then lowered in the engine Ford actually wanted the car to have. Every single one. Not a prototype run, not a special order. All 1,358 cars built over 2 model years went through that process by hand, because the engine Ford wanted in this Mustang did not fit in a Mustang. Not marginally, not by a few millimeters you could grind away. The cylinder heads and the car's own structure occupied the same physical space, and one of them had to go. And the perfectly reasonable question at this point is, why on earth would a company do that? Why take your best-selling car, ship it 40 miles, gut its front end and hand-build it back together? At a cost that meant Ford is widely believed to have lost money on every example? And the answer is the thing that makes this whole story strange, because it is not that Ford wanted to race this car. Ford never raced this car. Not once, not anywhere, in the entire history of NASCAR. That was never the plan, and understanding why it was never the plan is what actually explains the Boss 429. So go back to what Ford was up against. Chrysler had spent the middle of the decade beating everybody with its 426 Hemi. And after the ban and the boycott and the rule change, NASCAR's position had hardened into a single principle. If you want to race an engine, you have to sell it. Specifically, Ford needed at least 500 production cars fitted with any engine it intended to run. And Ford had built exactly the engine to answer the Hemi, a 429 cubic inch V8 with aluminium heads and semi-hemispherical, crescent-shaped combustion chambers, 4-bolt mains, a forged steel crankshaft, and exhaust ports so enormous that mechanics started calling it the shotgun motor. In full race trim, it made well over 600 horsepower. It also weighed around 680 pounds and measured roughly 34 inches long and 30 inches wide, which is the detail that is about to matter enormously. And that width was not incidental, it was the direct physical consequence of what made the engine good. A semi-hemispherical chamber lets you angle the valves apart across a domed roof so both of them can be enormous. And enormous valves need enormous ports, and enormous ports need heads big enough to contain them. Every bit of the breathing advantage Ford was chasing had to be paid for in inches across the top of the engine. So the engine was wide because it was fast, and it was fast because it was wide. And there was no version of it that solved one without losing the other. So now hold this thought, because it is the hinge of the entire story. Ford had a rule that said, sell 500 cars with this engine in them. And Ford's answer to that rule is the shocking part, because it was not the answer the rule was written to produce. The cars Ford actually intended to race were not Mustangs at all. They were the Torino Talladega and its Mercury twin, the Cyclone Spoiler II. Mid-size cars with long, drooping, hand-reshaped noses, built specifically to stay planted on a superspeedway at 190 miles an hour. A Mustang's short, blunt nose is hopeless at those speeds. Nobody at Ford ever imagined putting one on a banked oval against a Talladega. So the question becomes obvious. If the racing was going to be done by Torinos, why did the engine go into a Mustang? And the answer is that homologation rules count cars, not intentions. Ford did something unusual and completely legal. It homologated the engine separately from the body it would race in. The aerodynamic Talladega bodywork was signed off at the start of the 1969 season, and the engine was made legal by being installed in the one car in Ford's range that could plausibly move 500 units of an expensive halo model, the Mustang, the most desirable nameplate the company owned. Ford satisfied a rule about public availability by putting a NASCAR engine into a car it had no intention of ever racing, and then went racing with that engine in something else. The Boss 429 Mustang is, in the strictest sense, a legal instrument with wheels. And that is precisely why the fitment problem existed in the first place, because nobody had designed this engine to go in this car. The car was chosen for its showroom appeal after the engine already existed, which is how you end up at Kar Kraft in Brighton, Michigan. Kar Kraft was not some backstreet conversion shop. It was Ford's own specialist engineering contractor. The outfit involved in building the GT40s that beat Ferrari at Le Mans. And their instruction on this program was to make an engine fit into a structure that physically rejected it. So they did the surgery I described on every single car by hand, and then stamped a KK number onto a plate on the door. And here is the small absurd detail that tells you everything about how this project ran. Ford's system could not release a car from the assembly line without an engine in it. So every Boss 429 left Dearborn fitted with a 428 Cobra Jet, a genuinely brilliant 335 horsepower engine that other buyers were paying good money for, and the first job at Brighton was to take that engine out and put it aside. Ford built and shipped one of its best engines 40 miles up the road, purely so that it could be removed. Now, after all that, a hand-built car, a re-engineered structure, a NASCAR-derived engine, and a price of nearly $5,000, roughly double a base Mustang and well above a Boss 302, you would expect the fastest street car Ford had ever sold. And this is the part that genuinely surprises people, because it wasn't. Ford rated the engine at 375 horsepower at 5,200 RPM, a figure everybody involved understood to be conservative. But the street version was not merely underrated on paper. It was genuinely detuned in the metal. It ran a 735 CFM Holly, smaller, remarkably, than the carburetor on the cheaper Boss 302, with a mild hydraulic camshaft in 1969 and a compression ratio of 10.5 to 1. And laid on top of that mild street tune were cylinder heads with vast ports and enormous valves designed to feed an engine spinning past 6,000 RPM for 500 miles on a superspeedway. At low engine speeds, air moves through ports that big far too slowly to do useful work. So the engine simply feels lazy, exactly where a street car lives. Car Life tested one in July 1969 and recorded 0 to 60 in 7.1 seconds and a quarter mile of 14.09 at just under 103 miles an hour. A 428 Cobra Jet Mach 1, cheaper, ordinary, available on any Ford lot, was quicker. A Mopar with a 446 pack or a 426 Hemi would beat it by around a second in the quarter, which at that level is not a close race. The most exotic, most expensive, rarest, most heavily engineered Mustang of the entire era was, from a stoplight, one of the slower fast cars in the showroom it was parked in. And then, having built all of that, Ford watched the reason for it disappear. Because the engine itself did work. Spectacularly. In Talladegas and Cyclone Spoiler 2s, it took 26 wins in 1969 and carried David Pearson to the NASCAR championship, which is exactly the outcome the whole exercise was designed to buy. But Chrysler answered with the winged cars, the Charger Daytona, and then the Superbird, and the aerodynamic arms race escalated past the point where anyone was prepared to keep funding it. Ford's leadership changed, and factory racing support was scaled back. And then, for 1971, NASCAR did the thing it had done to Chrysler 6 years earlier and banned the exotic engines outright, the Hemi and the Boss 429 together. And the entire era of the homologation special ended in a single rule change. So, the final accounting reads like this: 859 cars in 1969, 499 in 1970, 1,358 in total, every one of them structurally rebuilt by hand at a facility 40 miles from the factory, most likely sold at a loss, in order to legalize an engine that raced for 2 seasons in a completely different car and was then outlawed. That is the shocking truth behind the Boss 429, and it is stranger than the version people repeat. This is the most famous homologation special in American history, and it did not homologate the car it was in, never raced in anger, and was deliberately tuned so that the version you could actually buy was slower than a cheaper Mustang standing next to it. Think about what a customer in 1969 was actually handed. He paid roughly double the price of a base Mustang for a car that had been physically cut apart and rebuilt by hand, carrying an engine developed to run flat out for 500 miles at Daytona. And if he lined up at a stoplight against a friend in a Cobra Jet Mach 1 that cost considerably less, he lost. He owned the rarest and most sophisticated thing in the showroom, and he could not prove it on the street. That is not a marketing failure. It is what happens when the customer is not the reason the car exists. It is a compliance document that happens to be one of the most beautiful and valuable cars ever built. But now, let me give you the fair case, because Ford ruined it on purpose is too easy. The mild tune was not only cynicism. By 1969, the insurance industry was actively killing the muscle car. Underwriters were pricing young men out of anything with a big advertised horsepower number. And a conservative rating plus a docile camshaft made the car insurable and, just as importantly, made it start on a cold morning and idle in traffic, which a genuine race camshaft absolutely will not do. Second, it never raced needs to be said precisely. The engine raced constantly and won a championship. It simply never did it in a Mustang body shell in NASCAR, which is a real distinction and not a technicality that erases the engine's record.